The essential principle of business, of occupation in the world is this. Figure out some way in which you get paid for playing. So there's something fundamentally wrong here, and which the businessman of all people needs to understand. What the businessman needs to know, equally, what the army officer needs to know, is the same. What do you really want? I have proposed that there be an entirely new kind of college entrance examination in which, instead of answering a lot of silly questions, you write for about 20 pages on your idea of paradise. It can be any kind of paradise you want. It can be very spiritual, it can be very sensuous. But spell it out. What do you want to happen in life? And then you will hand this thesis in to an assigned tutor on the faculty. And he'll read it over and examine you closely as to whether this is what you really want. Do you realize, for example, what goes with the things you say you desire? I mean, for example, you want to marry a certain kind of beautiful woman, and you specify in your paper the characteristics she should have. But, says the tutor, you said absolutely nothing about her mother. Because every girl goes with a mother. I mean, unless she's an orphan. And you must also specify what kind of mother-in-law you want. Well, then you have to stop and think about that. And that's just an illustration of going into detail and being very careful about what you desire, because there's a good saying, be careful of what you desire. You may get it. Because if you can't trust other people, you cannot have a community, not even a corporation. It's risky, very risky to trust other people, because they may let you down. But on the whole, if you do trust them, the chances are perhaps, 60 to 40, maybe a little more, maybe 75 to 25, that the system will work, simply because they're trusted. And as soon as you've got a system where, for example, in a supermarket, there are mirrors all over the place, TV cameras watching everything, all kinds of checks on the cashiers that they won't sneak off with something. You've got a system that increasingly won't work, because nobody will want to work there. One of the major reasons for hippies and dropouts is that human beings don't want to work under conditions like that, because they are mechanical conditions. And the mechanism is quite distinct from the organism, because the mechanism is arranged on linear plans, the book, whereas the organism transcends that. We don't know how. That means we can't write down how, because it's more complicated than any form of writing can express. You see, a lot of people don't feel happy unless they have another thing beyond money, which is called status. And status, to a very large extent in our economy, consists in conspicuous consumption, in having this thing and that thing and the other thing, in having a swimming pool, a Ferrari, a certain kind of clothes, and a certain kind of house with an enormous round-style picture window, and so on and so on and so on. And we think we need all that, because we've been persuaded by a certain kind of propaganda that that's how we ought to live. Because we haven't asked ourselves whether that was what we really wanted. In other words, we've been propagandized into thinking what we wanted. I remember my daughter, when she was in high school, number one daughter, who's now become very sensible, insisted that she had to have a certain number of cashmere sweaters. In those days, I couldn't afford them. I said, my dear, do you really want these? Or is it just that you've been reading ads in the magazine or listening to the other children? Because you see, schools are places where you send your child to be brought up by other children. And therefore, they get a kind of lowest common denominator of culture. So they all think they've got to have this, they've got to have that. And they don't really want it. If they sat back and considered, do I need all that? Is this trip really necessary? They would come to the conclusion that it wasn't. And that would be very important because they would save energy. You all know, of course, that we are nearing an energy crisis, that there is not enough physical energy going to be available for all the things we think we're supposed to do, to go rushing around and so on. So we need to take towards commerce a more relaxed attitude.